I'd have to say that Radiohead would go down in my book as one of the greatest band names of all times.
You have a book?
Yes.
Nice.
I update it often. It's in the back of my mind. I think it's a great name. I think it's up there. With other great band names like the Grateful Dead, I think it's a great band name.
Yeah.
And I think Government Mule is actually a really good band name as well.
Yeah. Especially if you know the stories.
Of the history behind the stuff. Yeah. But Radiohead.
Does Radiohead have a story? Is there a band name?
I don't know, but it seems like that I would draw a picture of Radiohead when I was a kid, maybe like a stick figure with
a jam box
radio type head.
Yeah.
I can picture myself doing that, and I may have even done it at one point before Radiohead. I think
pretty epic.
That it's a great name.
Yeah.
So.
So many bands nowadays, they really just go by the front person's name.
Yeah, the band's kind of a lost art form, isn't it?
It's kind of sad. You hear of so-and-so's name and the whatevers. Almost like it's an afterthought.
Yeah.
I don't like that. I like being part of a band.
What about when they name a band with a fake person's name and then the whatever is like Hootie and the Blowfish? Like,
yeah.
There was nobody called Hootie.
Oh, but there is now. But we fixed that.
And then Pink Floyd is another one probably.
Well, we were just talking about Maisie Starr.
Yeah. That seems like it could be a person's name. But it's
there was another one here recently. No, I don't remember, but it seemed like a person's name, and it definitely was not.
And then some of the bands are named either by critics, or something that happened. A good example of that is Led Zeppelin.
Oh,
because
that's a great story.
They were said to go over like a lead balloon.
Yeah.
And then they read the review.
They ran with it.
And went with it. Yeah, because they actually were just filling out dates, old Yardbird dates.
I was going to say, what were they called before? What were they?
Well, the Yardbirds had their own success, and they actually had 3 or more really great guitarists pass through at one time or another, starting... they had Eric Clapton, they had Jimmy Page, and they had Jeff Beck.
Some of the earliest rebranding that we can look at.
Yeah, I don't think all 3 of them played together, but I think that there was instances where 2 of them played in the band during transition times. So, interesting.
I know there's folks that have a lot of different projects that they're part of, and each iteration of the projects has a different name for... like Cream and all the people that are part of that, they all have other, it's like Ripple, other things.
They were like super groups. I mean, they were just reforming bands. They
were just having a good time, I think.
Some of the lineages I never even knew until much later. Like, one of the ones that I didn't know was the Byrds. I believe they had Chris Hillman and David Crosby, and then Crosby went on to form Crosby, Stills, and Nash and Young with some of the guys from...
Well, there's Crosby, Stills, and Nash, and then Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young.
Right. And
which they are, it is different.
And Stephen Stills came from Buffalo Springfield, and I think that Neil Young was with him for a while. And then, of course, Chris Hillman went on to form the Flying Burrito Brothers with... Graham Parsons,
which is I think an underrated band. I think it's kind of flown under the radar for a while.
I think that they had a major influence on, maybe like outlaw country or some certain era country, because they definitely had a certain feel to them.
I read that Radiohead had a big influence on Coldplay. Which, listening, you can kind of hear.
Yeah.
It's a different feel to it, but you can hear.
I can kind of see that a little bit. I always think of Coldplay as like the U2 light, which isn't really.
I think
with all the flack that U2 takes, I'm sure that's not like a good. Good comparison for a lot of people.
I really like U2, and I actually the listening that I've done of Coldplay, I like the songwriting, and I don't know if they do their songwriting or if
I think they write their own songs.
I really like their songwriting and their melody.
And I think that U2, they Well, the Edge was very influential on like minimalistic guitar. He didn't play a lot of guitar solos, and transferred the Edge. Yeah, I think I should come up with
It's like a wrestler name.
He gives Slash and Axl in Guns N' Roses.
Well,
in the 90s and early 2000s, you had great like stage names that were nothing to do with.
We have 2 keyboardists that play with us, and one of them is named Slice.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a great wrestler name too. I think you have to pick a wrestler name, and then that's your guitar name.
Body Slam Sam.
There you go. Done and done. Done and dusted.
Too funny. So back to Radiohead. Of course, they were one of those bands that flew under the radar for me, and they've been very super influential on a lot of musicians, I think. And familiar mostly with their hits. I did have one of their albums. I don't remember which one it was. Maybe Kid A. I listened to it a fair amount. I
don't know that I've done much active listening to Radiohead.
The surprise for me is Radiohead is when I hear one of their hits, and I'm kind of baffled that was Radiohead, and somehow I didn't realize it at the time. Like a good example would be this song. I've heard this song a lot in my life, and probably didn't realize until somewhat recently, or maybe I didn't take the time to pay attention to that it is Radiohead. I always think of their hit being Creep, and that all their other songs were somehow under the radar, but that's not true. They have several.
I think that one's been covered a lot. I think Creep is really attainable. It's really touchable, and a lot of people
relatable
relate with it. Yeah, even though I think.
Well, hits that swear are another whole ball game.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Because there's not a lot of them, because you're going to be censored from radio.
They had to be
especially
censored.
In the past, radio was the major form of digesting music, so they'd have the radio version that was either beeped out or an alternate version, a single release, and Creep had a single release, and they replaced the F word with very.
Yeah.
So.
Which I'm cool with, yeah.
It definitely, it keeps a similar thing, but.
It pulls the punch a little, and I think that's okay, though, for the airwaves.
There is the margin of swearing where there's nothing quite as impactful, or something that can maybe replace the angst of a certain word, or that maybe the surprise and shock and angstiness and that type of thing. But then there's also the flip side of that, where people just overdo and do it too much, and it kind of just becomes ordinary.
I think some of the most clever censorship, though, is when an artist understands that it will be censored, and so they do 2 versions of it. And I think the most dramatic and clever one for me was CeeLo Green
saying "Forget You,"
because he just came out with a whole separate version, and by that time it seems like everybody sort of knew. And when he did the live versions with the Muppets. Do you remember that he did the live version? The Muppets were singing along.
Really?
Anyway, the whole thing, it was a play on the censorship, almost making fun of the censorship, because everybody was in on the joke, and anybody that wasn't in on it didn't need to be in on it, and it was okay.
Right. And it was done really well.
I think
I'd
so
have
too.
To say, I don't think that it really lost anything.
I don't think so either. No.
Yeah.
And that's a sentiment, and there are people.
The song was flippant anyway, about being kind of just.
Well, there's people out in the world that don't swear in their daily life, and they don't care to listen to other people swearing. They don't feel like it adds to conversation, and I don't think necessarily that those people require sheltering. It's not that, but that. That swearing can be a form of lazy language, and I'm not saying always, but it can be a form.
It can be a turn off to some people.
Yeah, and I wouldn't want to alienate anybody because
sometimes I'm turned off because people don't swear. It depends on the person. Case to case basis, because I don't think to me it's just language either way, so it doesn't really,
it doesn't ruin your day one way or the other.
One way or another, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyways, I mean, Radiohead, they're a huge band. You know, a lot. In my mind, I compare them a lot in my catalog and understanding of music. I think to the Talking Heads, and
Is it because they also have heads in their band
I
name?
think it's because they both flew under the radar for me. And then when I just, finally decided that I was going to pay attention
Land
to them
on them.
later on, I was like, wow, man, these guys are really good.
I really like the Talking Heads, and it's kind of like a mixture of amazement and being baffled.
Yeah. And I guess it's fair to let music go by you on the first take sometimes because you may not connect with it, but also who can digest everything all at once, right?
Right.
I mean, you can't eat steak and lobster and hamburgers and hot dogs and pizza all in the same setting. I guess
It loses a little oomph if you
I guess
do.
you probably could, but it's not going to be an experience you'd really want to remember. Although you might remember it for a long time for other reasons.
Well, I was thinking about some of this Radiohead stuff, and I think it also has to do with where you are in your life at the time that particular piece of music is popular, on the rise, or
Oh, for sure.
in the wider listenership. Because we've talked a little bit about being like part of a herd mentality and wanting to be part of society, and when society is lifting something up, that's when it's got its best shelf life, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. So when the song is in its prime, it depends on where you're at in your life. If
What's going
you
on in your life
are
and how it hits
identifying
you.
with that piece of music, or I find there were spaces of my life that I didn't listen to the radio. So I wasn't
Interesting.
intaking new music.
Sure.
I was just listening to CDs or listening to cassettes or albums. I was curating my own listenership, and I wasn't taking in
Sure.
new music.
I think your thoughts could explain why maybe like general categories like the blues have such a long-term fan base because everybody experienced the blues, right? And it's a pretty common emotion.
Right.
It's something you can relate to. A lot of different songs. It's fairly
And pretty young too. I think
Yeah, you
like
can
even
experience
a
it. You can feel it
toddler
lost at a young
who
age.
hasn't been able to accurately name what emotions they're feeling can have angst at crayons that just won't, you can't get the paper off, or if they've broken, like you have there's a specific feeling there that if you could enunciate it even at a young age, the Crayola blues, that could be a thing.
On the flip side, one of the things I've had, and only certain artists really ring the bell, and we talked a little bit about it last week, is like the angsty individuals. And I think maybe
Right.
I wrote Radiohead off as that. And I think that appeals to a younger crowd for sure, especially transitional teenage years, preteens, transitional, growing up, growing out of the house, breaking away from your parents. There's
Well,
a lot
trying
of-
to become independent, but also still needing the shelter of
So
home.
I think that what I don't always relate to is that angsty youth thing. And even when I was a youth, I didn't really relate to it as much as the social angst. So like I didn't really relate to certain songs by Green Day, even though they were popular in my day, but there was lots of stuff of social angst, like The Clash, that I could relate to very easily,
Like what songs?
right off the top of my head, I can't really think
Let
of
me
them,
pin
but
you to
I'm
the
just
wall there.
saying in more in general,
Okay.
And then, I think that maybe I was dismissive of Radiohead because of Creep,
Okay.
because it was such a big hit, and you hear it, and there's this whole thing. Yeah, I can relate to it, but I wasn't really caught up with trying to feel special.
It wasn't
or
where you
trying
were.
To, like, get attention.
Yeah,
on
it wasn't
myself.
where
I
you
kinda
were
just wanted
either.
To blend away. And I didn't want to
Okay.
feel special per se.
That's the introvert in you.
So, I think there's some of that. Whereas I've always liked story songs, social commentary songs, songs of, at a very young age, one of my high school papers, and this was well after the time, but it was titled Countercultural Music and the Effect on the Vietnam War, basically, and the timing of the war, and basically the countercultural music and its effect on the public perception of the war, and how every music affected society at that time. So I've always been interested in not only the art form of the music, but the effect that it has on the population.
Well, even just the term counterculture, that means like your culture is headed off in one direction, and this music is counterintuitive to that.
Indeed.
So it's like a split or just a dialogue on different ideas as to that herd mentality, perhaps.
Yes. I think that music can affect people in so many ways. It's just beyond the possibility to understand it, to understand how it's going to affect any one given person, because each person is going to take any given piece of music differently in the way that it affects them.
Also, where you are in your life. You can take a piece of music that you listened to when you were in your angsty stage and listen to it now and have a whole different perspective of what that artist was trying to say, or that it kind of transcends that angstiness that you took from it to begin with, and you see it sort of a different side of the musical idea.
I think it's something that we've talked about a lot, is how really good music is relatable in a lot of different fashions, in a lot of different ways. And I think maybe the more relatable it is in the more ways, the more popular it becomes, because more people can apply themselves into the situation.
If the artist is known. Because I've seen some really good artists that don't have a platform because some of the things that we talked about before, they're not, they just haven't had the money to back them or the opportunity, or they came to music later in their life and they're not marketable, but they got really good songs and they got stuff that's super relatable. So I would encourage folks to go out and hunt down some of these musicians that are out there flying under the radar, maybe not ones that you would hear on the radio.
Indeed, we have the opportunity now to find things we've never been able to find before. So in that regard,
I'm finding stuff. I'm finding some nonstop, yeah. And I do. I'll say that I don't on the regular listen to the radio. I usually have a CD that I'm trying to create that relationship with and learn, and or a podcast that I'm listening to that takes up my entertainment time. And usually finding new music, I'll find it in short form videos. I'll find a piece of it and then go hunt it down, or our daughter will bring me a piece of music and I'll look more into that, or it'll be part of a show that I'm listening to and kind of grab my ear and I'll go hunt down more of it.
I think that TV is a big source of discovery nowadays.
Yeah.
Maybe like the radio was in the past, because so many songs get placement on television.
I think that happened since 2020 with the days of COVID and all of us being locked down and everybody binge watched everything.
I think it was, picking up before then, but maybe people have started paying more attention more recently.
Yeah. So I do find a fair amount of music on YouTube, because I'll go on and I'll look up something and I'll go, oh, what does YouTube recommend based on these weird conglomeration of things that I've listened for.
Indeed.
So yeah, it's interesting what it sends me.
Well, it's important I think the biggest thing you can do is share the music you discover, right?
Yeah.
Because it does get buried so easily with so much stuff out there.
Yeah, it does. And I'm still discovering folks. And you know what? I don't want to tout somebody that is being problematic either in their, out in their life. Like, hey, here's some great music, but the person, and I know that there has to be some separation of that. So I hesitate even to...
Well, sometimes you don't know what people
Yeah.
are like in their outside life.
Yeah.
So
People are just people.
people are just people.